Well, welcome to the next to the last, and this is we have a pinch hitter this evening. We got a very good pinch hitter though. Unfortunately, Gregory Wolf got like you, Eric, he got a last minute work assignment.
Right.
And fortunately, Bob keeps something always in the hopper and ready to go, and just in case. But what he has this evening is a very satisfactory presentation for sure.
We all wish to be satisfactory.
I already told him I already had my question lined up for after. Okay, so this evening Bob Bailey is going to be presenting A Tale of Two Seasons, 1889 and 1890, about Louisville, the Colonels. And it's a very interesting presentation because what that team represents, they are the first team in Major League Baseball history to go from worst to first. And that's what this evening's presentation is all about. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Bob to do his presentation. I just ask that if anyone has any questions, they just hit their chat button or comments, and we'll review those at the end. And we'll let Bob go ahead and start up his visuals, and from there, Bob, it's yours.
Thank you. Let me see if I can figure this out. There we are. All right, just one more. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Good to see you. So many of the old friends and new names on there. We're always looking for more. We'll be talking about the final presentation next month at the end of the presentation. So let me start here. In 1985, Tom Boswell published a book entitled Why Time Begins on Opening Day. True enough in a metaphysical sense, but other baseball writers appear to have some problems figuring out when Major League Baseball started. In 2014, Tim Wendell, author of The Summer of '68, the season when baseball in America changed forever, and at the time of the writing, he was a writer in residence at Johns Hopkins University. And he wrote an article, A Salute to Baseball's First Worst to First Winners. This article dealt with the 1991 Twins' worst to first World Series win, and the Twins being the first worst to first team ever. A year earlier, MLB.com columnist Tracy Ringolsby wrote, in the first 90 years of Major League Baseball, no team had ever gone from worst to first. He too was writing about the 1991 Twins and apparently dated the beginning of Major League Baseball to 1901. These guys may have been terrific writers on current baseball matters, but as we all know, baseball time does not begin in 1901. While Minnesota and Atlanta's worst to first runs in 1901 were not the first such runs in Major League history, it did appear to turn the spigot on of worst to first events, and the jump from last place to first place occurred an additional 13 times since then. Certainly the breaking of the leagues into divisions has abetted that a great deal. The Diamondbacks have been the yo-yo team 3 times in the post-1991 period. Boston is close by with 2 turnarounds. But before we pile the praise too high on the Red Sox, when we look for the reverse, that is first to worst, the Red Sox make that list too. In 2014, Minnesota is the category leader with 2 falls from grace. But back to our forgotten 19th century worst to first club. Here is the first worst to first team in Major League history, the American Association's Louisville Colonels of 1890. We have no earthly idea who put the several sizes too small derby on Jack Chapman's head. Perhaps it was a newfangled fashion statement. But anyway, it was the year of the Players' League, a contributing factor to the event. But it's too easy to say that the emergence of the Players' League caused the worst to first rise, as there was much more to this story. To go from worst to first, you first must be worst. And the 1889 Colonels were the worst team in either league on merit. From 1882 to 1884, the Louisville Eclipse Club was a competitive team in the American Association, finishing third twice in 3 seasons. But in 1885, the inexorable slide began. By 1888, the club finished 7th out of 8 clubs, a mere 44 games out of first place, with a 48-87 record, good for a .356 winning percentage. As bad as 1888 was, it would look like a stellar season compared to 1889. The 1889 squad set records for losses with 111, the first team to lose 100 major league games in a season. Consecutive losses with 26, which is still the major league record. In addition to 6 players going on strike and getting lost on a train that encountered the same wet weather that caused the Johnstown flood. The 1888 season was bad enough to cause some dissension among the Louisville ownership ranks. The main point of the conflict was whether or not to spend more money to upgrade the team. The spend no more money faction was headed by Mordecai Davidson, a tight-fisted businessman who offered to sell his shares and get out, or he would buy everybody else's shares and run the club himself. The other shareholders decided that getting out of the baseball business was a smart thing to do. So the 1889 season opened with Davidson as the club president. Mordecai Davidson was born in Port Washington, Ohio in 1845. Port Washington is in the same county that gave us Cy Young, Woody Hayes, and William Quantrill, leader of the Quantrill's Raiders during the Civil War. Kind of copying Woody Hayes in some ways. Davidson's parents died when he was a child, and little is known of his life before he came to Louisville from Indiana following the close of the Civil War in the 1860s. Davidson served in an Indiana regiment starting at age 16 in 1862 and mustered out of service after the close of the war in 1865 at age 19. He listed his home as Halbert's Bluff. It is now called Shoals in Martin County, Indiana, about 30 miles northwest of French Lick. He's reported to have been engaged in the battles for Missionary Ridge near Chattanooga in late 1863 and at Wheeler Ridge during Sherman's advance to Atlanta. His last action was part of a group attached to the cavalry troops of General James Wilson that took Columbus and Macon in 1865. For the remainder of his life, Davidson was active in the GAR, and at his death in 1940, he was one of the 4 surviving Kentuckians active in the organization. He shows up in Louisville in 1868. Prior to investing in the Colonels, he's listed as a bookkeeper for a local furniture company. We don't know how he accumulated sufficient capital to invest in a baseball club or ultimately buy the club, although I expect he was more than an ordinary bookkeeper at his job at S.T. Moore and Company. S.T. Moore was a furniture company when he first got there, but it diversified into storage and a number of other businesses. So he was probably more like the CFO watching over that for a number of years. But he apparently was able to save enough to buy small amounts of stock until he had enough to be named club secretary. Now, this idea fits in with the history of the Louisville club owners. The owners were rarely men of great wealth, but were among a group of successful businessmen who could afford to invest relatively small amounts in the team. Louisville was almost always an undercapitalized club with little working capital to make substantial investments in players. They seemed to work on the theory that once they signed their players, secured playing grounds, and had enough funds to purchase equipment, the revenue from gate receipts during the season would balance the books by season's end. This was rarely true, certainly not in Louisville. Davidson was the epitome of the robber baron mentality, even if he wasn't a robber baron. Spend no money you could avoid spending, push salaries down to the lowest possible number, have high expectations of your employees, and blame them for any problems that arise. He began the 1889 year by trying to cut the players' salaries and had a rather contentious set of negotiations with many players. He named himself manager, thus avoiding hiring a manager or paying a player to do extra to do the job. But it also allowed him to travel with the team and keep a close eye on the cash that came in. But he stayed away from actually running the team on the baseball sense and leaving that to the players. Generally, the team captain would make out the lineup. The team started poorly in 1889 and then declined. Davidson became disenchanted with the lack of sufficient gate receipts and instituted a more draconian style to motivate the players. He became quite liberal in assessing fines. Offenses included errors, stupid base running, wild pitches, and pass balls. The local press in Louisville was quick to speculate that the fines had less to do with improving the team and more to do with minimizing the amounts paid to the players. In a mid-June payday, only 2 players received their full paychecks. 6 players owed the team money. The largest debtor was Pete Browning, who owed $325 back to the club, in addition to the not receiving any salary. Guy Hecker fared slightly better. His paycheck totaled $1.95. As the team was engaged in a 21-game road losing streak on a trip east, they traveled between Columbus, Ohio, and Buffalo, New York on their way to Philadelphia. The club did not appear for their scheduled game in Philadelphia and was not heard from for several days. They didn't show up in Philadelphia, it turns out, because they were stuck on a flooded section of track between Erie, Pennsylvania, and Buffalo. The rainfall that caused the flooding was the same weather system that caused great amounts of rain to fall in western Pennsylvania and precipitated the Johnstown flood. But surviving the flood was small potatoes compared to what was around the corner. As the Davidson fines started to pile up, the players understood that their paychecks would again be considerably lighter on payday. Several players began talking about ways to have the fines vacated. These discussions led to strike talk. A group of players approached Davidson, who was traveling with the team. They sought to have the fines remitted. Davidson refused and upped the ante by threatening to fine every player $25 if they did not win their next game, and $100 if they didn't show up and went through with their strike. Well, on June 19th, 1889, 6 Louisville players refused to play the game. They were Pete Browning, Guy Hecker, Red Arrett, Paul Cook, Dan Shannon, and Harry Raymond. Louisville had to pull several amateur players from the Baltimore stands to fill out their lineup. While this was going on, the American Association was meeting in New York to decide what to do about the Louisville franchise. The meeting in New York ended with Davidson agreeing to sign new players to strengthen the team, and the association dropped the matter. Ultimately, the players were talked into returning to the field with assurances that the association would find a solution to their problems. With the returning players back, Louisville continued to lose games until the count reached 26. The streak ended at home. The returning team lost their first 3 home games to St. Louis before claiming a win over the Browns in the final game of the series. While these were going on in late June, early July, Davidson was entertaining offers from Louisville groups to buy the club. He always rejected the amount offered. He variously said that the offers did not cover his debts, or he had a better offer coming from another group. Within a week of closing out their losing streak, however, Davidson walked away from the team and returned the franchise to the American Association on July 3rd. The association quickly found some local investors and sold the team for its debts while canceling all the fines except those leveled for the 6 strikers and a fine on Pete Browning for a drunken spree in Brooklyn. The initiator of the original offer to purchase the Colonels in June was George Rieger. Rieger made a comfortable living as the manager of the George Wolfe Jewelers in downtown Louisville, but Rieger did not have the capital or the friends to put together an acceptable offer. When William Jackson, Zach Phelps, and William L. Lyons and others joined the effort, there was enough capital and status to get the deal done with the association. The last 3 mentioned were key members of the new ownership group. Lyons was named president of the club. He was involved in stock and bond brokerage, along with cotton and grain brokerage. He was a prominent member of the community, and he was elected mayor of Louisville in 1890. He built his firm, Hilliard Lyons, into the largest brokerage house in Louisville, operating independently until 2021, when the firm merged with R.W. Baird of Milwaukee. William Jackson was a prominent lawyer and a longtime judge in Louisville. He came to Louisville after the Civil War, where he served as a general in the Confederate Army. He was the first cousin of Stonewall Jackson. He, among several other generals with the last name Jackson, were called Mudwall. Jackson is a nickname. Jackson's law partner, Zach Phelps, was an investor in the new ownership group, and like Jackson and Lyons, served as the ball club's president during the 1890s. He was the American Association president in 1891 and served as legal counsel to the National League after the Association and League baseball war ended in late 1891. The new ownership group did not have much effect on the club in the final months of the 1889 season, and the team continued to limp along to close their season with their 196 winning percentage, while the new owners tried to create a strategy to make the team more competitive. Before the season ended, the new ownership decided to cut loose some underperforming and high-paid players. This would be quite a wrench on the community, as the first players to be dropped were Pete Browning and Guy Hecker. Both stars appeared to be in terminal decline. Interestingly, the owners must have changed their minds on Browning's release, as Browning's name showed up on the Louisville reserve list. Hope must have sprung eternal with the new owners, hoping to retain their drawing card at a lower price. Browning had hit a woeful .256 for the season and had played only 60% of the team's games. He missed considerable time while taking the cure at West Baden Springs in South Indiana. It was not Pete's first visit to West Baden. Hecker turned in a 5-13 pitching record while hitting a respectable .284. His batting average exceeded his pitching winning percentage. Both his batting average and pitching winning percentage exceeded Louisville's 1889 winning percentage. It was Hecker's second consecutive losing season, and the first that he pitched fewer than 200 innings. It is probably an effect of averaging over 510 innings pitched per season during the 4 seasons from 1883 to 1886 that had finally caught up with him. Browning and Hecker did not appear to be in great demand. After the new year, Pete signed on with Cleveland of the Players League, where he led the league in batting average for his final big season of his career. Hecker took the position as manager of the National League's Pittsburgh entry. Unfortunately, he appeared to follow the pattern from Louisville and he led the team to a 23-113-2 season record. This was the second team to lose 100 games in the season, and they beat Louisville by 2 games. Next, the club owners hired Jack Chapman to manage the club in 1890. Chapman was a longtime baseball manager who had assembled a 42-year baseball career from 1858 to 1900. Chapman had been an integral part of the Brooklyn Atlantic championship run in the 1860s. He played in the National Association, and he had managed extensively in the majors and the minors before becoming a minor league owner. He organized his organized baseball managerial career started with Louisville in 1876. He managed 7 major league seasons through 1885 with additional stops in Milwaukee, Worcester, Detroit, and Buffalo. Before returning to Louisville, he also managed in the minor leagues of Buffalo and Syracuse. After being let go by Louisville in 1892, he managed Buffalo, Wilkes-Barre, Toronto, Meriden, and Norwich, the last 3 as the team's owner. Although his managerial record was well below average, he was very popular with the press and enjoyed a reputation as a fine owner's manager. This was due to his ability to run the baseball and financial affairs of the clubs at a consistent profit. He was most adept at scheduling profitable exhibition games throughout the season to add revenue to the club's coffers. He had 2 celebrated signings during his career. In 1891, he brought Huey Jennings to the majors, plucking him off a low minor league squad in Lehighton, Pennsylvania. And in 1893 with Buffalo, he signed Jimmy Collins off the sandlots of Buffalo before he was drafted by Boston and began his Hall of Fame career. When the 1889 season was over, the owners gave Jack $10,000 in new money to recruit players. In normal times, this would have been a boon to someone like Jack Chapman. Chapman was well versed in what it took to recruit star players to a ragtag team like Louisville. Usually the answer was money. But these were not normal times. A lot was happening with teams changing leagues, the Players League opening operations, and the players ready to move to what they saw as a bright future of a player-controlled league. Chapman was savvy enough to know that in the current salary fights, he was not going to be able to snag high-quality players against the Players League competition and the National League and American Association squads looking to fill holes of defectors to the Players League. Chapman had his work cut out for him trying to improve the team. The Players League signed over a quarter of the players on the American Association reserve list for 1890. The National League took another 24 or so to replace some of their player losses. Among the hardest hit were St. Louis, Baltimore, and the Athletics. Stars like Charlie Comiskey, Henry Larkin, and Lave Cross jumped to the new league. Louisville lost only a handful of players, as you would figure on a team that didn't have many stars, but only pitcher John Ewing, who had a 6-30 record in 1889 before moving to New York of the Players League to join his brother Buck Ewing, might have been worth retaining. He won 18 and 21 games the next 2 seasons. These are the players that were gone from the Louisville club, either to the Players League. Toad Ramsey was traded to St. Louis, and Hecker and Browning were released. Remaining on the roster were 2 pitchers, Scott Stratton and Red Aaron, 2 outfielders, 2 infielders, and a catcher. The Colonels now had to fill out the rest of their roster after losing or releasing a significant number of the 1889 squad. This was Chapman's job, and he used his knowledge and contacts in the baseball world to sign minor leaguers of some promise. Chapman had spent most of the 1889 season managing Syracuse of the International Association and had managed Buffalo for 3 seasons before that. so he had some familiarity with professional players in upstate New York. He signed 3 minor leaguers from the New York State League. He grabbed one of his former Buffalo squad also. Harry Taylor was a rising first baseman catcher with Elmira. He hit .377 in 1889. He stayed with Louisville for several seasons, but 1890 was his best year. He hit .306 during that year and had 45 stolen bases. While Taylor's future in baseball lasted well into the next century, it was not a career on the field. Taylor earned a law degree from Cornell and ultimately set up practice in Buffalo. In 1900, he became counsel to the Players Protective Association, an early baseball union, and was active giving legal advice to the American League as it moved to the major league status in 1901. Herb Goodall was a teammate of Harry Taylor's at Elmira when Chapman signed him for his only major league season in 1890. As a spot starter, Goodall turned in an 8-5 record with a 3.39 ERA. George Meekum was a pitcher Chapman signed on opening day in 1890 off the Grand Rapids of the Michigan State League. The 24-year-old Meekum became a key pitching contributor behind aces Scott Stratton and Red Arrett. In 1890, he posted a 12-7 record with a 2.91 ERA. The last New York State League alum was second baseman Tim Shinnick. Chapman pulled him from the reserve list of Lowell in the Atlantic Association. But Shinnick had spent most of the 1889 season with Auburn in the New York State League. Shinnick replaced Dan Shannon at second and hit .256, about the same as Shannon did in 1889 before he signed with Philadelphia in the Players League. But Shinnick added 62 stolen bases and 82 RBIs. He played for Louisville in 1891, but production had dropped and he was released. He continued his baseball career in the minors till 1901. The final Chapman early season edition was Charlie Hamburg. Hamburg was a Louisville native who had played for Chapman in the mid-1880s in Buffalo. His only major league season in 1890, he hit .272 with 77 RBIs and 46 stolen bases. The last pickup was pitcher outfielder Ed Daly, who the club signed as a free agent in late August. Daly was in his 7th major league season when he joined Louisville, and he had a 6-3 record with a 1.94 ERA down the stretch. One closing note on one of the new players. Herb Goodall holds the major league record for the most at-bats for a player with a career batting average over 400. He was 19 for 45 with Louisville for an average of 422 in his only major league season. In addition to the player movement, Louisville was helped by franchise movement. The National League, trying to shore up its ranks to compete with the Players League, induced Brooklyn and Cincinnati to jump from the AA to the NL. Brooklyn had won the association pennant in 1889, and Cincinnati was one of the stronger contenders in the association. Kansas City dropped out of the association and joined the Western League. Teams from Rochester, Toledo, and Syracuse joined the American Association, and they placed teams in Baltimore also to replace another squad to at least get themselves into the New York area. This undoubtedly weakened the American Association with the loss of a pair of top teams, the addition of 3 former minor league clubs rounding out the league. So by opening day of 1890, Louisville found itself with a younger squad. The average age was 1 year younger, new leadership, and in a league that had lost its strongest clubs. Also had competitors weakened by Players League raids. They had a number of major league rookies and several players who turned in just terrible performances in 1889. Louisville, now named the Cyclones by the local press due to their fast start and a twister that swept through Louisville that spring, found themselves in first place after the first 2 weeks of the season. This rarefied atmosphere was so alien to the players that they slipped to 27 and 25 through June and were in fourth place, 9 games behind the Athletic Club. A 20-game homestand to start July began with 12 straight wins, including 3 over the Athletics, and saw Louisville vault into first place by percentage points ahead of Philadelphia. This string of victories was highlighted by Louisville's Scott Stratton contributing a 16-game win streak from June 28th to August 28th. It is the longest pitcher's winning streak in American Association history. Stratton's streak equals the American League record of 16 games shared by Walter Johnson and Joe Wood in 1912, Lefty Grove in 31, and Schoolboy Rowe in 34. He trails the Major League record of 19 that is shared by Tim Keefe from 1888 and Rube Marquardt in 1912. Through August, Louisville continued to play at a better than 600 clip as teams fell out of the race. By late August, they were 7 games in front of the second place St. Louis club, and a 16-8 September 1-loss record led to an early October pennant-clinching victory over Columbus, clinching the pennant with a shutout by Stratton. So how did Louisville do it? How did they go from one of the worst teams in Major League history in 1889 to the American Association pennant winners in 1890? We've already spoke of the effects of the Players' League and the subsequent disruption of the teams in the American Association. So now we need to examine how the players performed on the field and how that differed from the previous season. This slide shows how the American Association fared statistically from 1889 to 1890. You see that most offensive categories declined and that pitching and fielding improved. Certainly batting talent was thinned out during the 1890 season, and perhaps American Association teams dipped very deep into the available players to fill their rosters. Well, that does not explain improved pitching and fielding. Pitching may have, did I just lose? Is my screen still on, Peter?
I see it.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna have to. There we are. Thank you. They may have been facing less talented hitters, but the pitching corps were thinning also. As for fielding, there's always more good gloves available than there are good bats. So we see that runs per game is down 8%, hits are down 8%, slugging is down 6%, and batting average is down 3%. The big pitching gain was fewer unearned runs, which dropped by 23%. That's over 600 fewer unearned runs for the American Association season. So it's not surprising to see that errors decreased 14% or 11% per game. Pitching ERA was essentially flat. Now, we next see how Louisville did versus the 1889 season. Where association pitching categories were about flat in 1889, Louisville improved over 40% in the various categories. Louisville's runs scored were up 30%, or about 1.5 runs per game, with the team scoring 187 more runs. The pitching staff allowed 494 fewer runs than the previous year. That's a single season improvement between the two of 681 runs. Runs allowed dropped from 7.79 per game to 4.39 per game. Some of the decrease in runs allowed can be traced to committing 200 fewer errors. Louisville led the league in hits, batting average, fewest runs allowed, fewest earned runs allowed, earned run average, fielding percentage, and 5 other major categories. In 1889, they were at the bottom of the league in just about every hitting, fielding, and pitching category. One way to try and figure out how the turnaround happened is to compare Louisville's production position by position with the prior year. As you look at this slide, you'll notice that no position underperformed the 1889 record by any significant amount. Harry Taylor was substantially more productive than the released Guy Hecker. Chicken Wolf had a decent 1889 season, but won the American Association batting title in 1890, also scoring and driving in around 100 runs each. Tim Shinnick hit and scored about what Dan Shannon had done in 1889, but drove in 34 more runs. Charlie Hamburg batted about 15 points better than Pete Browning, but scored 54 more runs and more than doubled Browning's RBIs. But for the big individual turnaround, take a look at Phil Tomney. The shortstop improved his batting average by 64 points, scored 11 more runs, drove in 20 more runs than 1889. But Tomney's big contribution will show on the next slide. In 1889, Phil Tomney was awful with the glove. His 114 errors committed was second in the American Association to Kansas City's Herman Long, who had 117. In 1890, he committed 50 fewer errors. Committing 114 errors must have let in a bunch of runs in the 1889 season and undoubtedly contributed to multiple losses, just as the 50 error reduction in 1890 saved runs in games. We don't have the data to determine if the decline in fielding was fielding errors or throwing errors, but it does appear that Tomney was a more careful shortstop, getting to fewer balls and making fewer throws. But as you look at his fielding line, Phil Tomney was not a bad shortstop in 1889 and did not suddenly become a good shortstop in 1890. With the horrendous errors in 1889, Tomney was still among the leaders in the association's shortstops, being third in putouts and fourth in assists. He remained in the same relative position in 1890, being third in putouts and second in assists. In 1890, Tomney's range factor declined 1 chance per game. In 1889, that one extra chance was half of an error. As a point of reference, the American Association's errors declined almost 14% in 1890, and Tomney declined 44%. Tomney spent 3 seasons with Louisville, with 1890 being his last. In 1891, he played for Lincoln in the Western Association. That was his final baseball season, as he died before the 1892 season opened of a lung infection that was a complication of tuberculosis. The next slide shows Louisville's team change from 89 to 90 in fielding. You'll note that Harry Taylor was getting to a lot more balls at first base than Hecker did. Chicken Wolf had a significant decline in his range factor in 1890, but he cut his errors in half. As a team, Louisville in 1890 improved their fielding percentage by 31 points, or about 3%. Errors were down 204, and the errors per game dropped from 4.2 to 2.8. The worst to first story continued for the pitching staff. This category was the key area of improvement for the club. In each key pitching category, they improved 30 to 40%. Louisville led the league in wins, ERA, fewest runs surrendered. Their ERA dropped over 2 runs per game. Walks declined 40%. Runs surrendered category was most striking, as they allowed over 500 fewer runs between the 2 years. Certainly, the elimination of 204 fielding errors made a substantial impact on that drop. And remember, 50 fewer errors were contributed by Phil Tomnick. The heroes of the 1890 season were pitchers Scott Stratton and Red Ehret. Stratton, a Kentuckian from Taylorsville in the next county southeast of Louisville, turned in a 34-14 season with an ERA of 2.36, the best in the American Association. He also led the league in winning percentage with a 708 mark. He finished second in wins to Sadie McMahon's 36 wins, playing with Philadelphia and Baltimore during the season. Stratton's crammed his 400-plus innings into a truncated schedule as he refused to play ball on Sundays. He had a clause in his contract affirming this stand. He had only one other winning season. In 1892, he went 21-19 for Louisville. Perhaps some of Stratton's improvement in 1890 stemmed from his marriage in the 1889 offseason. He married a girl from Taylorsville, but his bride's father objected to the marriage. He didn't think that marriage to a ball player was an appropriate match for his daughter. To minimize any potential strain between the families, the Strattons did not return to Taylorsville in the off-season for several years, maintaining a home in Louisville. After he retired, the couple returned to Taylorsville and operated a grocery store for many, many years. He was also often in Louisville when they would have promotions or honor the 1890 team. Red Ehret chipped in with a 25-14 record and trailed only Stratton with a 2.58 ERA. Ehret was also a Louisvillian, was a Kentuckian from Louisville. He came out of the Germantown neighborhood. The Germantown neighborhood still thrives today with many bakeries and bratwurst houses and whatnot, and festivals, along with the neighborhood just to the south, which is called Schnitzelburg. You got to go to, if you're ever in Louisville, go to Schnitzelburg neighborhood and have lunch at Check's. Red also turned in a career year in 1890, posting his best season in wins, ERA, winning percentage, and strikeouts. He stayed in Louisville one more season before playing for Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Cincinnati, which ended his major league season career, and he continued to pitch in the minors through 1906. Stratton's career year was remarkable as he won 7 more games than the Louisville team won in 1889. Ehret was just 2 wins shy of matching Louisville's win total. You could say that Herb Goodall also had a career year in the majors because it was his only big league season. Meekum contributed a career year as he won 12 of his 15 major league wins in 1890. Meekum, Goodall, and Daly won 26 games among them, bettering the win total of the men they replaced, Hecker, Ramsey, and Ewing, by 14 wins. Louisville took the pennant with a dramatic turnaround in 1890. Much improved pitching was the major contributor to the improvement. Eliminating 200 fielding errors didn't hurt either. The batting star was Chicken Wolf, another Louisville native. He led the AA in batting average with a .363 average. His best season for batting average over his career batting average by 60 points. He also led the association in hits with 197 and total bases with 260. Wolf, Shinnick, and Hamburg each drove in over 85 runs. Harry Taylor led the squad with 115 runs scored, as Wolf and Farmer Weaver, also broke the 100 runs scored mark. But reciting the improved statistics by most players did not get at the question of what happened to make Louisville such a stellar team in 1890, when they were just god-awful in 1889. Certainly the rise of the Players' League and the thinning of the talent pool pushed the Louisville team toward the middle of the pack. But that does not get at the improved hitting, fielding, and pitching. They had 3 rookies as regulars with a pair of rookies as regular pitchers. One player was in his 2nd season with the club, and 5 had 3 seasons under their belt. Only Chicken Wolf was the grizzled veteran in his 9th season. So my candidate for the creating the environment that allowed this improvement to happen is manager Jack Chapman. Chapman was a longtime major league and minor league manager, and although his career record as a manager is so-so at best, he did have a wealth of experience in baseball circles and the knowledge of how the baseball world worked. And that enabled him to spot some potential additions to the team from the minors. He also had a reputation as a skilled manager when he had some good players on the roster. He had 4 very successful seasons managing Buffalo to go with his pennants in Louisville and Meriden. While there is not much evidence that this spotting of talent had been helpful creating competitive teams in the past, in 1890, he did seem to catch lightning in a bottle with most of his personnel moves paying off. In addition, the team was coming off a dissension-filled season under the leadership of owner Mordecai Davidson. With the jettisoning of big names like Pete Browning and Guy Hecker, along with losses to the Players League and the National League, only 6 regulars remained in 1890. Wolf, Tomney, Jack Ryan, Harry Raymond, and Stratton and Eric. Chapman was able to create a more congenial atmosphere where there was little arguing within the team and little animosity toward the team ownership, unlike '89. Chapman was always viewed as a man with a great measure of geniality throughout his career, and it appears to have paid some dividends in 1890. Also, there was a lack of battles among the Louisville owners themselves that made the season move along, concentrating on on-field items rather than what might have been happening in the front office. This ownership harmony, however, began to slip in 1891 and 1892 as 2 factions emerged in the ownership ranks that caused the rift. The rift between mostly showed up between Chapman and the recently acquired second baseman Fred Pfeffer, who, as a Louisville native, had friends among the owners group. Unquestionably, there was a healthy amount of luck involved with claiming the pennant, but that's true in most races. But regardless of what contributed to the win, Louisville claimed their first and only major league pennant in 1890. I thank you all. I'll get out of this and we'll go to questions, Peter.
Bob, that was incredible. The analysis was incredible. Now, believe it or not, I didn't have any chat questions. I've double checked that because I think you were moving along with such a flow of information that everybody was kind of tuned in.
Well, let me just say one thing about the data on there. We'll post all of this slides tomorrow, the next day, on the website with the recording of this session.
So my question, which I began to ponder about a day ago, was they succeeded in winning the American Association without their star, Pete Browning.
True enough.
Who went on in 1890 to have a great. Didn't he win the batting title for the Players Association?
He did. He was. That was his final big season. He stuck around for about 3-4 more years. He actually came back to Louisville at the last team he played for again, I think in '94. But yeah, he showed that he had some something left in the bat. But there's always, when you're used to having a big bat in the lineup, when it's gone, it's tough getting used to. And Hecker was the big arm, although Ramsey had kind of replaced him. They were fairly close to one another from 87 and 88 and 90, 89. But I remember reading many years ago about one of Bill Veck's books. It may have been Veck as in Rec. He was talking about the 1964 season when the Cardinals and the Phillies collapsed and the Cardinals won the pennant. And he said, never underestimate, it was only Stan Musial had retired, I think, 2 years before, and they still hadn't gotten used to not having that bat in the lineup. It's amazing. Louisville just turned around. I don't know whether it's the 19th century had these sort of things because players moved so much. They didn't move so much in Louisville because, as you heard in there, a lot of these guys were Kentuckians or Louisvillians. They were always very heavy in that. Browning and Wolf being the big names there. But yeah, they had to wrestle with all sorts of things. And Browning wasn't, as he would say, he wasn't lining them out. He also wasn't missing 40% of the games because he was drunk.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Bob Tiemann. I just got to say that another reason that you might say that the Colonels were lucky or the Cyclones were lucky in 1890 was that the Athletics were in first place in 4th of July and finished in 7th place because they couldn't pay their players and they all left.
True. That the Athletics collapsed, and they were having the problem, of competing against the Players League
and the National League.
Yeah, well, there was 3 teams there, and nobody could quite. I don't think any of the teams did well financially, but yeah, they did, and that was another addition to the circumstances of what they faced. So there was one more team. The Browns essentially came back up into the race in July and August, but they also fell off. They had lost a good number of players to the Players League.
Indeed.
I want to say hello to one fellow that I see I haven't seen. Hello, Harry Rothgerber. Good to see you. Harry is an old friend from Louisville, and we used to do a lot of things together. Good to see you, Harry. Anything else?
Well done, Bob.
Thank you.
Good analysis.
Okay.
Well, Peter, if that's it, I guess we'll sign off here. And I thank everybody for coming and putting up with me for an hour.
Well, it is well worth it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter? Do we lose Peter? Well, let me close then. So I'll finish with that. Next, yeah, he's gone off the screen somehow. He's gone. Next month, John Pregler, who is with us tonight, will be making the presentation. John, do you have anything you want to say briefly about that?
Sure. Thanks, and great presentation here tonight. Just the blurb on the presentation I'm doing. It's about the history of baseball in the Mississippi River town of Dubuque, Iowa, between 1860 and 1920, which helped introduce no less than 3 members of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, 6 major league team owners, 6 major league player managers, 5 managers, and over 30 major league players, including 2 of the 3 key founding fathers of the American League. Their history is American baseball history, and it led to more than one 20th century sports writer to refer to Dubuque as an early cradle of baseball, which ultimately gave rise to the Field of Dreams and a Sea of Corn 20 miles west of Dubuque. So this presentation is their forgotten story.
Very good. Well, we look forward to that. This will close off our third season, and we're looking forward to hearing that presentation. We'll see you all on the second Tuesday of May. If there's nothing else, thank you all for coming, and have a good night.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Later, Bob.